And on this issue, we have the experts. First of all, Rabbi Elchanan Zon. Rabbi Zon is the Hevra Kadisha par excellence. He founded the Hevra Kadishas and is still the expert on Jewish burial, and he's from Queens. And then we have Mrs. Robin Meyerson, who co-authored the book From This World to the Next. For those of you who believe you're entitled to the next, for those of you who believe there is a next, or for those of you who haven't woken up from this world yet and will be in the next, read about life, afterlife. There was a time when Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all studied the subject together. The eschatology of it was always a combined subject for Jews and for Christians when the takeover of the land and the religion by Constantine and others hadn't taken place. The Lateran Council hadn't come into being. There was this glorious study period. And eschatology, the next world, has a bearing to the vast portion of those living on the planet, except, of course, to those who believe in cremation who are Jews. Cremation may play a part for Buddhists, it may play a part for Taoists, well, for Confucius, but for Jews and Christians and Muslims, it's not supposed to play such a role. But somehow Jews have taken the lead.
As recently as 2010, it was about 25% nationally, and probably about the same among Jews. Now the estimate is, not the estimate, but it's been actually documented that in this past year, in October, we passed the 50% mark. 50% of all Americans were cremated as of October 2016.
Would you say there's a parallel between interfaith marriage and cremation?
Absolutely. I'm sorry?
If I could add that on the West Coast, it's even higher.
Right.
In California, Nevada, other states on the West, it's 70% of Jews.
Just like interfaith marriage.
Right.
That is correct. In Florida as well, the South, very high percentage of cremation. The Northeast, although we are in Manhattan, which is a rather liberal place, and many people in Manhattan are cremating, many Jews in Manhattan, probably higher than any other area of New York. But in the New York area, we estimate somewhere between 25 and 30% of Jews are cremating.
So we have situations in this book where someone's passed away and the body is lying in a crematorium because the family can't decide what to do. The body's there for 2 weeks, and then the person who's passed away comes into the daughter's mind and says, "Don't cremate me." She wakes up from this dream and she decides to bury her father because of the dream. And then other miracles happen. Other family members have a baby on the day of the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the person's passing away because of changing from cremation to burial.
I want to tell you a story. Martin Reisman was the #1 Jewish table tennis champion with Dick Miles and Sal Schiff. He won all over Europe, the United States, doubles, singles, and it was at the tournament in India that the sponge paddle we use today in table tennis was introduced at the world match with Martin Reisman and Sato from Japan. Martin Reisman was never religious a day in his life. Ping pong was his life. He came from the Lower East Side, and he was a proud Jew, but never religious in any sense. And he's profiled at the club Spin, where he's the emblem. A dear friend of ours, and we had ping pong matches all the time, and all of a sudden he died. And he died at the hospital at Manhattan Hospital, and my wife was his closest friend, and his body was unclaimed. His only daughter was in California and couldn't get here, and they were going to cremate the body, and my wife said, "Oh no, Martin didn't want that. One thing we know is he told us both. He doesn't want to have his body burned like the Nazis did to the Jews. And he wants to be remembered, and he wants a place." And with the Hebrew Society on Staten Island, we were able.
You talk about the Hebrew Free Burial Association.
Yes,
Okay.
we were able to get intervention, and we were able to have the hospital hold the body, and I had Rabbi Wolf from the temple Beth Israel in Paramus intercede, and we had a service, and we had a burial, and we had radio hookup with his daughter in California as he gave remarks.
By the way, I'd just like to mention the Hebrew Free Burial Association will bury many people who would otherwise be cremated because there are no funds to bury them. They bury about 350 to 400 people a year. I've been their rabbinic advisor since the late 80s, and they do a marvelous job. So people should know that if there is a person of the Jewish faith that requires burial, there's no one to bury them. They will make sure that they get a proper burial. So that's something that people should be aware of.
Can this be a protected right? Let's say, I know a dear friend, Sidney Zion, didn't want to be cremated in the last months, but he was, because he was no longer there to direct it, and he had previous cremations of his family. And Erwin Corey, who you knew the late daughter Margaret of, he was cremated. His son Richard had misgivings, and certainly I argued that he should be buried next to his daughter. And if they had something in writing, is that the only way that cremation may be avoided if the surviving family or guardian or what have you doesn't want to do a burial?
Let me address that. There's no question that writing is extremely important. First of all, in New York State, if someone designates an agent to take care of them post-mortem, take care of their needs after death, that person becomes the person who is responsible. So if you've designated an agent and you know that that person will make sure that you're buried, that person will be able to do that for you, even if there are family members that will refuse. However, under all circumstances, it's a very good idea for people to put this in writing, especially where you know that there may be some question afterwards as to what others will do after you die. Very important to have it in writing.
Does the Hever Kadisha step in? Let's say nobody is around to, or wants to, or knows how to do the process of burial. Is that when you call the Hever Kadisha, they take care of the body and the burial, or is the burial separate?
They will help with the burial. The burial is generally done by a funeral director. You need a licensed funeral director to do the burial. Of course, as I mentioned, Hebrew Free Burial will get involved. They are funeral directors as well as a Hever Kadisha. We will be able to work with funeral directors to make sure that the burial takes place, even though we will not necessarily arrange for the burial or pay for the burial, but we will certainly hook them up with some group that will make sure that the burial gets done. We'll work with funeral directors, we'll help them in any which way, and if necessary, recommend Hebrew Free Burial as a last resort.
Now, with the afterlife that you're discussing here in this book, there are, of course, many, many books that have been written of Believe It or Not, or the supernatural, or people found their way back home, pets found their way back, had conversations, Edgar Casey, all that. I'm a student of Houdini, who went around trying desperately to talk to his mother and found one charlatan seance after another. As it says in the Bible, be careful of these people, get rid of these sorcerers and these future tellers and these spiritualists, and they were all fake and fraud. You're not talking about that. No. You're talking about something very, very different in a holy sense. Would you explain that further?
Sure. So when someone has an afterlife experience, when it can't be a coincidence. It can't be. So let's say something happens on the yard site when someone passes away and a baby is born, because they intervened specifically. They stopped a cremation. That's because the afterlife is involved, and people are affected by people in the other world.
Robin, why don't you tell them who this is that you're talking about?
Oh, okay. I'll tell them. So there was a situation where my uncle passed away, and he was going to be cremated. And I just randomly called my aunt, and she said, are you calling because you heard the news that my husband passed away? And I had no idea. And I'm in the Hever condition myself, and I said, you cannot cremate my uncle. And for 2 weeks, he's lying in the crematorium, and I begged my cousins, I begged my aunt, please bury my uncle. And I gave charity, I gave tzedakah, anything I could do, praying. And then she had a dream. My cousin had a dream. Her father came to her in a dream and said, don't cremate me. And the next day when I called her, she said, okay, I've agreed. I'll do the burial. And then I had a baby. I had a baby exactly on the date that my uncle passed away. And I was like 44 years old.
Does Judaism doesn't believe in coincidence. Judaism believes that everything is ordained. Everything is ordained. So what do you say when you're not a member of the family? What do you say, as I said to Richard Gorey and to Zion family and to Larry Gelbart's family, the author of the TV show MASH, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, who was very, very Jewish. Well, don't get cremated. I failed in all cases. How do you convince these people when you're not part of the family and when other people say, listen, this is a personal thing, this is a tragic moment, butt out?
What I say is like when a baby is born, okay? The baby is born, you wash the baby, you wrap the baby in a blanket, you give the baby to the mom. When someone passes away, you don't put them in the oven, you gently put them in the earth. You gently put them in the earth.
I think it's very important to realize that when a person has passed, it's very, very difficult at that point to begin a discussion. First of all, people are in grief. Very, very difficult to really, if they have made the decision to cremate for whatever reason, very, very difficult, and sometimes it seems very insensitive as well to really get involved at that time. The discussion really needs to be had earlier if you really want to be successful. Opening a discussion, there are these death cafes, I'm not if you've read about those, but the idea of opening a discussion, a lot of what we try to do is recommend how these discussions can be done. First of all, at funerals, at a shiva home, which is when you visit a mourner, you could talk about the funeral and the respect that a funeral provides. People just aren't, sent to a crematory to be burned, but rather there is a family gathering. They're placed in the ground. Family participates. There's closure. The family sees the person. They place them in the ground. They know they are there. We visit whenever we can. But there is a very strong opportunity at those times to talk about it. It can be an event like the cremation of someone famous and say, why would that person want to be cremated? They certainly could afford burial and whatever. They have family should go, whatever it might be, to open the discussion earlier. After death, it's very difficult. I think the other thing that you need to really understand is that every case is different. We try to focus on the reasons. When we talk to people, why are you cremating? Sometimes it's financial, and we can offer assistance. If it's earlier, we can make some suggestions. If it's after the fact, there are ways of doing it, like Hebrew-free burial or whatever it might be. But there are many reasons why people cremate. Sometimes it's environmental. The fact is that it's not very good for the environment to have cremation. In fact, traditional Jewish burial is much preferable for the environment, for environmental concerns. Okay, the body's placed in the ground, returns all of the nutrients to the ground. There's no formaldehyde that is put into the ground. There's no metal caskets used.
There's no burning.
There's no burning, which is a tremendous amount of carbon. We have a brochure called Jewish Burial equals Green Burial. Okay,
But there is a land use. The objection is that all these areas are cemetery, but if you go to Greenwood Cemetery, or you go to the ones in Beverly Hills, or you go to the old cemeteries in Salem, or the famous cemeteries in Jerusalem, you want to see these places. You're happy they're there in Prague. It's a number one place, not only for tourism, but for study, for history, and you can make them look gorgeous.
I hate to say it, but this is one place where we are united. We're all there together. It doesn't doesn't matter where you came from, what your life was like, but this is where the entire community comes together.
How come they don't think a golf course takes up too much land?
Or
How
Walmart.
How many Walmarts do you need?
Absolutely.
And then the stores go vacant, and then they become a rubble, and then the people stop playing in that golf course, and then what happens? And it gets abandoned. A building start, homes start, and they abandon them, and they don't care. But this little tiny plot of land, this is taking away the earth.
Especially if we bury a few deep in many communities. Even in the Jewish community, it's permitted under certain circumstances with a certain amount of space between people. And in Israel, they've begun doing that simply because they're running out of space. But that certainly is a very small price to be able to provide the kind of respect that I think we are looking to provide to people. People are meant to be respected when they die.
Now, have you come across, either one of you, where we have cemeteries marked for desecration, marked for graffiti? Recently in St. Louis, in Staten Island, elsewhere, locally, in the country, in Europe, certainly in Israel, they are targets for vandalism, for terrorism, for Jew hatred. Is there any correlation as to the outrage or lack of outrage that is directed to those who perpetrate these acts by those who use cremation? In other words, the people who are for cremation, they care less about what happens to a cemetery, and the people who are against cremation, they care more. Is there any correlation to the act of vandalism in a cemetery of the person who cares about burial?
I really don't know. I don't know the studies, but I will say that people have used that argument as a reason why they don't want to bury. But frankly, that's what it is. It's an argument because the fact is there may be desecration of the stone. The people are still in the ground and safe within the ground, have been respected. And if anything, the fact that people react to the graffiti and react to these acts is an indication of the respect they have for the people who are buried there. No one cares when someone takes an urn and sprinkles the ashes somewhere. It's no problem at all. Or throws them out.
Ashes, there's no DNA in ashes. So people think that they want to keep the ashes in an urn or wear it on their necklace or on a ring. There's all these like fads today. But there's no DNA in ashes. It's really just ashes. So
Is it proper if a Jew cremated and put the ash in an urn, and the urn is on the mantelpiece, like in the movies, this is Uncle Simon over there, is there any obligation for people to show respect to that urn?
It's just ashes.
It's just an urn of ash.
It's
The
not
short answer is no. There is no, ashes are no, in no way are they the same as a person or as a grave. There is absolutely no requirement to have any respect.
And it's commonly made fun of. The ashes get spilled, the dog urinates into it's dropped on a person's head, it's leaked across a carpet. It's the common fodder for comedy in the films. And cemeteries are not usually common there for horror films or scare films or for dramatic moments, the most dramatic moments with the coffin and the service and the speech and all the rest of it. What about the follow-up? What about a person does get buried? What is the percentage today of Jews who then visit the grave regularly, take care of the grave, like in many movies, are seen going to their loved one and having a place where they can emote with their loved one and treasuring the spot, or religious Jews performing the obligations with Kaddish and so on, with minions and all that. Has that declined, increased, stayed the same?
I think within the Orthodox community, it's still very much stayed the same. There is a very strong desire to, a sense of responsibility to go, a sense of connection to go. They go and they recognize that there is a part of the neshama, a part of the soul that exists at a gravesite. Cemetery in Hebrew is called a Beit HaChayim, the home of the living. And it's not just a euphemism. Our belief is that there is a vestige of the neshama, of the soul, that continues to exist at the gravesite. That does not exist with our ashes. As people will sometimes make the argument, why not bury the ashes? Might as well. Same thing. We'll cremate, it's cheaper, and then we'll bury the ashes. it's not the same because the ashes no longer are that person. Okay, they have no real. It's as Robin pointed out. There's no DNA. There's no requirement legally or halachically to treat it any different than ashes.
You know what I'd add to that is there are actual tours to cemeteries to visit famous people, famous rabbis, famous celebrities. So people want to go.
Walking tours.
Yeah, walking tours.
I know.
All over the world.
All over the
Look
world.
at how much
Right.
we've given up to go to the tomb of Rachel. Okay, in Israel.
We shouldn't have given up anything.
I'm saying, but
that was a sacrilege.
Right, I agree. I'm
And the
just saying-
UNESCO now with Hebron,
Right.
and our Mechpelah,
Right.
our ancestors, our Abraham, Isaac,
But we
Rachel.
still are fighting for it, and we still visit, and we go with the buses that have bulletproof, glass and all of that because it means something very important to us, and we believe that those places are holy and sacred, and that Rachel and our patriarchs are in those graves.
And Jacob's
And-
tomb
and
was
our-
violated,
Right.
and but the Muslims respect burial. They respect tombs. Moses is to them an Arab, is an ancient Egyptian, and they look for his tomb outside wherever they think it is. They only attack Cave of Rachel because it's not to them a Jewish tomb, and Jacob is not to them a Muslim tomb. It's to them something outside their sphere, and they have no respect for anybody's tomb if it's not Muslim. And the best proof of that is in Jerusalem, where we had the most holy sacred graves on the Mount of Olives, and the people of Jordan, who are supposed to be our peace partners, used them for latrines and destroyed the whole Jewish quarter which honored them.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned Moses. One of the most common reasons you'll hear when you talk about burial, well, no one's going to visit my grave. I believe, by the way, there's a lot of guilt in that. I think they didn't visit their parents' graves, and so they now don't want anyone to have to feel guilty about not visiting their graves, or somehow they're going to be paid back, and that's justice, whatever it might be. But the point is that Moses was perhaps the most famous person buried in the Torah, buried by God himself.
Like
last
this.
act in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses. Okay, 5 books of the Torah. Last act, God does it himself, and the passage right after, "V'lo yada ish et kurato." No one knows where he was buried. No one will ever know. They're still looking for it. Okay, so obviously the act of burial is not because people are going to visit, it's because innately we, as human beings, deserve the respect that burial provides.
Is there any contradiction, and did you find any in what you wrote, from going through all the details and forms and applications and time that's involved with a proper burial, and then not visiting the grave except maybe sporadically thereafter? Is that a contradiction, or, as you've just said, have you fulfilled your duty and sent the person to where a person should go simply by the burial?
You know, there's so much comfort with a burial. The family has comfort with the burial. With a cremation, there's no closure. There's very little closure. When you go to the cemetery, you bury the person, you have closure. It's the psychologically.
Is that what you found?
Yes.
Universally?
Yes, universally.
You have found that in every case, there's not somebody who said, "Oh my God, why did I waste my time?" In every case, they were grateful that they went through the burial.
Grateful, and people regret cremation, and they can't undo it. You can't undo it.
You can't bury when there's no body.
That's right.
Absolutely. I don't think one really has to do with the other. There is responsibility for us to treat every person as sacred. We are containers. Our belief is that we contain a soul. The soul is actually part of God himself. It's spiritual and it's holy. We wouldn't burn the ark after you remove the Sefer Torah, after you remove the scroll from it.
You don't
Because
destroy a city.
You don't destroy a city, right? You don't destroy even a tree that gives fruit. We don't destroy it. Here is a container of something very special. It needs to be respected. We cherish, we bury treasure.
What about pets? Pet cemeteries? What about if pet is part of the family?
Politically difficult question to answer, but let's put it this way. In Jewish law, there is no issue with cremating pets. I believe that the Muslims do not cremate pets, but it is not something that derives from Jewish tradition or law. If someone has a feeling that a pet is important to them, I would bury the pet. I certainly believe that burial is something that should be done for everyone, not only Jewish people, for every person. And if you feel you love a pet, I think the respectful thing to do is to bury it. It's interesting that the Midrash, part of the oral Jewish law, tells us that when the first person died, and that was when Cain killed Abel, he didn't know what to do with the body, and he watched a raven come by and bury its prey, and realized that that is the way in which he's supposed to take care of his brother. Okay, so that was an animal. I think it's fine. I think it's good. I think it's natural for animals to be returned to the earth. I don't think they should be cremated.
The elephant's graveyard, they know where to go. Animals know they have to come here. I just visited my mother's grave and my grandparents' grave, Rita Feller Taylor and David and Bertha Feller, and I was very pleased they were there. So I want to thank you both for having come, Rabbi Zone and our great author here, Robin Meyerson. And the book is From This World to the Next, and hopefully we're still in this world for a long time to come, but if I see you in the next, you read up on it. And let's put an end to the fires. We've been burned long enough, and we have to commemorate too many people whose bodies we don't have. And let's celebrate the ones we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.